The crazy thing is that there's not any panic in that moment. The crazy thing about it is there's actually relief. Because in some ways, I've been here before because it's like, I can't go anywhere. I can't run anymore.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Recovery Podcast. My name is Matt, and on today's episode, I'm joined by my sponsor and good friend, Mitch Spies, who will share his story about the dangers of trying to control alcohol, the pain of denial, and what it's like to find relief in being found out. Hey, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the Recovery Podcast. My name is Matt, and just a little housekeeping we're going to start off with. Just a reminder that while we do encourage everybody that's on this podcast to share their experiences in their respective recovery programs, remember that nobody is a representative or spokesperson for the programs that they choose to share their experiences from. So let's just keep that in mind. I want to make sure that I'm honoring the idea, at least honoring the idea behind the principle and the requirement of anonymity that programs like AA, NA, and CR have. But with that said, I think you're going to find some encouragement and some hope, and at least maybe you can make fun of the person I'm about to introduce. So with that, I'm excited, and it's a little bit of a special honor to introduce my guest, and that is Mitch Spies, who is my sponsor in Celebrate Recovery and has been a part of every pretty much every step of the way of my 2.5-ish, almost 3, somewhere along that years of recovery that I've had at CR. And I know that you've been a part of I know you started in AA, right?
Correct.
So you're an old head, as they say in the AA world. I don't want to get too far ahead, but how long have you known about CR?
So a friend of mine and I, at the invitation of a pastor of a church that we both attended at the time, suggested that we go and check out Celebrate Recovery, and that was the winter of 2019. So
Okay.
right around the holiday time, the end of 2019 going into 2020.
Man, nobody told me you were that fresh into CR when I asked you to be my sponsor. But you just celebrated 19 years.
18 years.
18 years. So you have a voting eligible sobriety baby.
Yes.
So that's a lot of, okay, I feel better about that. But before we get too far, because I don't want to get too far into your story on why, how you found Celebrate Recovery, let's go back. Let's start. You want to start back in your childhood? Just give us a brief history of that. If there's anything, actually, before we do that, do you want to give like a brief synopsis about what you struggle with and kind of go into those 18 years a little bit, and then let's start back in early years.
The de facto introduction that I give in the CR circles is that I'm a grateful believer named Mitch Spies. Found freedom from drugs and alcohol a few 24 hours ago. But I still struggle with life on life's terms, which is why after 18 plus years, I still am engaged in recovery. I still participate in recovery. I'm still in meetings, and I'm still engaged and immersed because, what I was told many moons ago was that, and it's written in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, that nothing assures us protection like working with other alcoholics or other addicts or other people who are struggling with whatever their hurts, habits, and hangups are.
Right.
That's the insulator.
Okay. So, in your, I don't know if you already said this, but your main vice is alcohol. I know that you've had a varied history, the same as me.
Yeah, I'm a mixed use user.
Right.
Eloquently, I call myself a boozer and user. But my go-to and my drug of choice is alcohol. I could leave other substances alone. And I think, in a true, accurate sense, those were recreational.
Right.
Weed I probably flirted with, a stronger grip. But drinking was my thing.
Right. We all got our thing. So let's start. If you want to, let's start back in your childhood. Is there anything? Start back as early as there was something that you felt like maybe set you up for the story to come as far as your sobriety. So tell us a little about your childhood.
With the benefit of the 2020 rear view lens, I'm almost 50 years old, and I vividly remember my first taste of beer. I was a toddler, 3, maybe 4 years old.
Start 'em young.
Right. Well, so, again, I'm almost 50 years old. So we're talking, the later 70s. And I remember a family function and going and getting my dad a beer. And watching him, this is the old Tab, Schlitz beers.
I think those were before me.
Yeah, the Pop Tops. And I remember watching him opening it, and I just very boldly, brashly asked for a sip, and he didn't hesitate to give it to me, and I immediately fell in love with the elixir of the gods.
Elixir of the gods, nice. Okay. Is that what they call them up in Michigan?
My last drink was 30 Miller High Life, the champagne of beers.
Yeah, okay.
I had a love affair.
Did you just pick your beer based on like the street name, like the street, like this is what we lovingly know of this beer, and you're like, I don't listen. It tastes like but like
I tell you what, I remember in those glory days of the 70s and early 80s, there was a beer commercial. It's called Ham Beer. It was a lumberjack looking dude, so it looked like you or I, driving around in a bikini top, like chopped off Jeep, and a grizzly bear. and that was the commercial. He just drove around, four-wheeling with his bear in his Jeep, and then showed up at a lumber yard drinking ham beer with all the guys that were just getting off shift. And I swear, if ham beer still existed, that I would have probably drank that. Because yes, the label was important. The label was important. If it didn't look cool. So in my college days, I drank Old English 800, the 8-ball. I have a tattoo on my shoulder of a bull's head that was Schlitz Bull Ice. 22-ounce bottles were clear bottles. They weren't brown bottles. They weren't tinted.
Cow.
And on the glue side of the label, and it's a good size label because it's a 22-ounce bottle, was a bull's head. And it was the bull that I was looking to get, because I'm a tourist. So the tattoo I wanted to get was a bull's head. But every bull's head logo or idea that I could find printed somewhere had the horns up, like the Chicago Bulls team logo.
Right,
I wanted bull horns down, like it was coming at you. Right. That was the way. We'll get into it, but that's the way I lived my life. And the Schlitz Bull logo was horns down. And I'm like, that's it. I can't tell you how many of those I had to drink to finally get a label to peel off cleanly and not ruin.
I'm sure that was a tough process. We're like, all right, kid, give me another one. This label's no good.
Well, so this is early mid 90s. This is before cell phones. This is before the technology that we have today. Right. That be able to, I'll just take a picture of it and then take it to the tattoo artist.
Right. You had to actually take the label with you.
Right. Right.
I mean, you could have just taken the bottle with you.
I wasn't smart enough then.
Hey, man, many of us aren't. All right. So I know you're from Michigan. Did you grow up? I don't know if you told me this or not. Did you grow up your whole life in Michigan?
No, I was actually born in Middletown.
Right up the road. That's right. Okay.
I moved. We lived in Miamisburg my early childhood. And when I was in the 3rd grade, we moved from there to North Indianapolis.
Okay.
In Carmel.
Carmel, I know it.
A lot of people do. And a few short years lived there, and then landed in the West Side Detroit suburbs in the spring of 1986, which puts me in about the 6th grade.
Okay.
And then I lived there. I lived in Michigan, and mostly in the Detroit area for the next almost 25 years.
Wow, I thought you were younger when you. I thought I vaguely remember you saying you Oh, I forgot. I don't remember you saying you were from Middletown, but I remember you. I thought you were way younger when you moved to Michigan. So, but how was that transition? It was for work, right? Your dad?
Yeah, so my dad got a promotion, which was the move from Ohio to Indianapolis,
Right.
and then took a new job, which took us to Detroit. Um, the move to Indy was okay.
Still pretty close.
Yeah, and so my mom grew up in Carlisle.
Okay.
So the Middletown roots and the South Dayton roots were prominent. I've got 3 uncles and their families and cousins that all live in the Dayton area.
Right.
That we do family things with them throughout the year, a couple times a year. The move from Carmel to Northville was tougher. Being a little older, being in middle school,
Right.
And not fitting in.
Starting
at one
over,
point
new
there were I
friends.
recall a serious conversation about the possibility of me moving back to Carmel to live with neighbors, our old neighbors, because things weren't going so well.
Wow. Yeah. So that's
And at the 6th grade, 7th grade age,
that's brutal, man.
you're
That's a brutal age.
you're not even a full-fledged teenager.
Yeah, but everybody's still. That's like, yeah. I don't know about your experience. Well, so I don't know about your experience in 6th grade. I hate that was probably like that middle school age was probably the age I hated the most because that's when maturity's not there, but everybody's starting to go through their changes.
Yep.
And so you got testosterone and a bunch of middle school boys who have just heard the word penis for the first time and they think it's hilarious, and then everybody's a jerk. It's brutal. Kids in general are brutal.
Yeah, my new kid initiation was being held down in the back of the bus, and so this is late 80s. Everybody was wearing Chuck Taylors.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a soft floppy shoe, right? And the kids took their shoes off and beat me with their shoes, like we were in Asia or something. But they held me down in the back of the bus and they beat me with their shoes. That was my new kid initiation. The silver lining is that we moved to Michigan. I want to say March. It was late in the school year, so.
Okay.
All I had to do is white knuckle to the end of the school year, which was, 2 months,
Right,
12 weeks, something like that. And then I had the summer to, meet the kids in the neighborhood, and actually make a few buddies, which I did. Unfortunately, but the 2 kids that I was closest with were a grade older than I. So once school started, we stood at the same bus stop, but once we got to school, I never saw them.
Right. Yeah, I was a year older than a class 2 above Kyle. So even though we were friends, Kyle is my best friend, by the way. He's eventually going to be on the podcast as well. He's also Mitch is also Kyle's sponsor, and Kyle and I met at church when we were when I was 13, he was 12 or something like that. And, but yeah, kind of the same thing all throughout high school. I'd see him every once in a while, but we didn't really, I didn't really have any close friends from middle school on. And, so I get what you're feeling with that, going with that. Did that help you with, getting bullied at all though? People messing with you? Having a upperclassman, quote unquote?
No, because the one kid was, he was a scrawny runt.
You gotta find bigger friends, dude.
I'm always. It wasn't until I met you that I had friends that made me look like I was pint sized.
Right.
When you're 6 foot and 300 pounds, you're a good sized dude. And I've always been rotund throughout my life, husky.
That's right. We call it husky in the
Midwest,
the Kmart days,
right? So no, Chris Klepacki lived across the street from me. He was originally from Cleveland. And in his 8th grade year, I think literally soaking wet with, pocket change and rocks in his pocket, he was maybe 95 pounds.
You could pick him up and use him as a weapon, I guess.
So my younger brother, my Irish twin, we're 10 and a half months apart. His nickname was Tiny from my mother because he was always so much smaller. And he actually he was tickled to live across the street from Chris because he was finally not the smallest kid. And then the other kid, we lived on a corner. So I had one buddy who lived one direction across one street, and then the other kid lived across the other street in the other direction. So Justin was the other kid that lived across the street, and he and his family moved in like 6 weeks, 8 weeks after us.
Okay, so he's a new kid too,
right? So we moved into a subdivision that was being built.
I got you.
You know, in phases, and so my parents, they bought the model house as they closed the first phase and moved on to the second phase of the neighborhood. And so Justin's house was one of the first houses, or one of the last houses rather, that was just finished. So that's why he moved in a few weeks after us. So in some ways we went through it together.
Right.
So he's just an average sized kid. It wasn't that he was a big tough kid to, help with the muscle.
Right. So you get to Michigan, start to get established. Was the next year any better for you?
Eventually it started to help because, with getting into sports and having forced friends through teammates.
Right.
And as the neighborhood got built up, more and more kids and more families moved in, and they were all new kids to some degree, even if they just moved across town. Detroit being, the automated and automotive world center that it is, where I grew up was very similar to like a Mason in Westchester.
Okay.
So there's lots of white collar, lots of middle management and executive level. And so a lot of the kids that moved into the neighborhood were from all over. They weren't just across town moves. They were from out of state. So
you were like the OG new kid.
Yeah, in a sense. So, fast forward to like freshman, sophomore summers, like, there was a gang of us, white kid suburban gang, of both boys and girls that, we rode bikes together. The local community pool was on the campus that the high school was at. Easy for us to, to ride bikes together and spend all day up there. So by the time I got to high school, I did actually have some legitimate friends. But being, and this goes to my addict thing, the chameleon, so I had my neighborhood friends. I had my football buddies. I had the honors class classmates. And then, if I had a part-time job, I'd have a buddy or two from that. So looking back, what I realized is that I had lots of acquaintances. I had lots of people that I kind of knew. I didn't have any like real depth.
Right.
In a lot of my relationships.
I'm glad you mentioned the chameleon thing because it's something I kind of sense in the back of my head, but I didn't really recognize in my own life until you and I started working together as sponsored sponsee, because you mentioned it before, and it didn't really hit me then when you mentioned it too on this was during COVID, so we were doing a lot of Zoom calls and stuff like that, and I realized that for me, I had a lot of relationships like that too. In fact, Kyle might have been like my only true friend through all of it, and the only reason that Kyle and I kind of like hit it off that way is that we were both kind of like rejects. And so we didn't really we're like, you're a loser, I'm a loser. Okay, we'll just be losers together. So like there was no reason to put up a face about anything. But like everybody else in I actually preferred most of my friends to be compartmentalized. Like I remember getting nervous when like friends from different groups would like meet each other because they're like, because like even if I wasn't consciously thinking about it, like I acted this way around these people and I acted this way around these people. And I don't know if they would like the versions if they crossed kind of thing.
No, they didn't. They weren't compatible because like for me, the neighborhood kids knew that I could be kind.
Right.
And that I was a good guy. The football buddies knew a very crass version of me.
Right.
And then being, in honors classes, I had some brains, stuck somewhere in his head.
And that's the side you didn't want anybody else to see.
No.
When you're a kid, you're like, I can't let them know.
All right. And so, because I didn't want to be labeled the nerd.
Right.
And so walking around, and I don't know what the thrice version of duality is, but I mean, that's, that multiple personality disorder, was, again, looking back, evident earlier on in my life.
So I'm gonna hit the chameleon thing one more time. And the only reason why is I kind of want to get your thought on this is when you mentioned it to me, and I kind of had that moment of clarity about my own life and my own tendency to at least previously, before I kind of hit rock bottom and I just stopped caring as much, kind of that chameleon kind of tendency I know that I had, and that you mentioned that you had. Kyle, I know that, Kyle mentioned that's something that he had. I know that I've heard other people in recovery mention that that's a tendency that they've tended to have. So I don't think it's a stretch to probably get to the point where you're like, this seems to be something that goes along, at least tends to be a trend with people in recovery. So why do you think that is?
I think it goes beyond recovery, folks. I think the men in general, we have a default, that philosophy of that, men thinking like waffles and women think like spaghetti. Have you ever heard that phrase?
I haven't.
So men have a tendency, in a general sense, to compartmentalize their lives. And it's derived from a almost like a character default of the role defines me. Mm-hmm. So in this situation, I have this role in there. Therefore, this is what's the expectation. And in a different situation, I might have a different role. And so that then dictates, what character I play. And being an alcoholic and being an addict, we see certain things be amplified, and exponentially, disproportionate. And I think that's definitely one of the things in my story and in my life that I saw, where I went to some extremes with some of the different kind of personality fronts that I had based on what role I was in. In college, it got really, really, really messy. It's to a point where recovery allowed me relief because I had the chance to go through inventory and discover that about myself.
Right.
But that's part of still my daily struggle, because I still have these multiple roles that a lot of them don't touch each other.
Right.
Especially now because of, the post-pandemic situation. I work remotely now as opposed to being in an office, but I'm a corporate guy, and if you met me at CR, you'd never in your wildest dreams think that I was in finance and accounting.
Right.
But that's what I do for my profession. I don't hide it, but because I coach baseball at the youth level, and this spring I'm coaching 10-year-olds, I don't wear my recovery on my sleeve and tell everybody, that that's where my background is. But, most of the families that I've coached over the years, it's come out at some way and at some point. So it's a known thing, but it's, I don't walk around with recovery
right
when I'm in my coach mode.
Right.
So it's one of those things that I have to be cognizant of. I have to be diligent with, because if it's left unchecked, it'll get me in trouble.
Right.
Because what happens is the two paths get too far away from one another. And one of the things, like I said, that I found some tremendous relief in recovery was finally being able to shed all of those facades, all of those masks, and just figure out who the hell Mitch was.
Right.
Because I'd lost who he was.
Yeah.
And now everybody has an equal chance of knowing the same guy.
Right.
That's important.
Yeah. That's a good explanation. I like that. It's so to go to like get into, like, for instance, alcohol. for me, part of the reason I liked alcohol was never my favorite drug of choice. It was just more available than other things that I did. But the one thing that I did like about alcohol in a social situation is that, at least in my experience, it tended to like offer relief from the stress and the tension of having to have those different faces. Like I kind of, when I lost my inhibition, I didn't care the person that people saw when once I got into a certain level of intoxication.
Right.
And I also liked that I got to see who other people were
Right.
when they were intoxicated.
Disclosure.
Yeah, I felt like if like I knew people, like when there were people that I would be around that I wouldn't really get to see like the quote unquote real them until they were 6 beers in. And then like all of a sudden they're like, where the hell has this guy been this whole time, But
see, and I think for me, I love drinking because it exacerbated the character thing. Like if I was in a business situation, I could drink martinis or scotches,
yeah, so
and be the roller. But if I wanted to be the down to earth, crassy, beer swilling guy, I could be that guy too.
right.
Where like, the dope smokers are dope smokers, right? It's just, you're a surfer and or hippie, if you're a weed
Or
head,
you're in
right?
a band.
Right. Or you're in a band, or if you're, a speedhead, or, just cracked out, like you have all of these stereotypes, right?
Right.
Drinking was the one that you could be multiple,
It's true. Yeah.
personalities, and to an extent. I mean, because right, once you get to that point of inebriation, right, then the real you does come out.
Then you're just the drunken toddler version of yourself,
right? Whether you're wearing a tie or
a wife beater
or no shirt at all.
Right. All right. So to get us back on the story mode here. So you started to get in your high school years. I know you've told me a few stories. So at what point during your high school years, or was it before then, that alcohol or using in general kind of made its presence or got its start in your life?
Before, and I think really, the launching point was my senior year of high school. There was dabbles where, my dad had a garage fridge that always had beers for when people came over. My dad was a martini guy, so his personal stash was an Absolute vodka bottle stashed in the freezer in the kitchen fridge, and I knew never to touch that because it got used way too often.
Right, he'd know.
Well, but like he was also a traveling guy professionally. For a long time, he was an executive sales, and so he managed the territory. So he'd be gone for 3, 4, 5 nights at a time. And he wasn't a heavy beer drinker. Every once in a while, he'd have one while watching the game because it's too early to have a martini.
The weird rules,
right? So it was a lot easier to sneak beers, 2 and 3 at a time,
right?
Out of the fridge. But it wasn't something that I abused because I knew that if I ever got caught, man, hellfire was coming,
right?
But my senior year, through the circumstances of having a part-time job, I was working at a gas station that had some younger adult guys who were my coworkers, mechanics, and they and so now it became a lot more easier to access being a minor, and so I had ways to get booze, and booze was always easy to get because you just go down to the liquor store, you go to the beer hut, whatever. And I remember that's when I started seeking out the opportunities to drink whenever I could. And it was because of the job. I worked late nights, I worked a Friday night that I didn't get off until 11 o'clock because the guy that worked midnights came in at 10:30, and there was a 30-minute where we're switching the registers out and stuff like that.
Right.
So my parents were used to me not coming home until late, and I could go and get pound a few, and then get home before I was too screwy to drive, and live on the thrill of like, yeah, I got a 6er in me tonight. I remember the first like legit just wasted drunk was a bonfire with some classmates at somebody's property, at somebody's farm. Um, so, similar to, like I said, Mason, you didn't have to go very far before you got to some rural areas of West Detroit. And so it was easy for us to have bonfires, and I just got toasted. Like they had to pull me out of the fire twice. So I was told.
You were that guy.
I don't remember the night. I don't remember the night. Somebody brought me home in my own car, hit the garage door opener, shoved me in the garage, closed the garage, and left me to my own devices. And suffice to say, it was an ugly scene.
Did your parents come out to the garage? And
no, they didn't come out to the garage. So the way the house was, the staircase to go upstairs is a 4-bedroom colonial. You walked from the foyer up like 5-6 steps to a landing, made a 90-degree, and went up, right? That wall at the landing was the wall that my parents' headboard was on.
Man.
And I made it to the very top of the stairs and then lost it and fell down the stairs and crashed into that wall. And so if you can imagine, at the time, 200 plus pounds football player crashing into a wall 5 feet below where you're sleeping.
Right.
You're not asleep anymore.
Right.
And, so there was hell to pay about coming home in that condition, and not knowing and not being able to answer any questions. Like, I don't know how I got home. I don't know who brought me home.
Yeah, I bet that freaked him out the most, probably.
And I don't know what time it was. That was my first legitimate blackout too. That's a very key milestone for my story, because blackouts became a regular occurrence. That's the way I drank. And it got to a point at the end of my drinking that it wouldn't take copious amounts to get me there. Like a very, very, like, it should have been a very, very distinct red flag warning sign. Was I went to a local haunt. A buddy of mine was and a rugby teammate of mine was the bartender at an Irish pub, 2 miles from my house. And one night I went in there and I had a pint and a shot. And I don't, to this day, remember how that night ended.
Yeah, I remember we had that conversation because, like I said, alcohol was never... I definitely had some stretches where I was drinking heavily. Like, I remember at the worst of my drinking, like, this was before my second was born, so I had my own room. I remember walking in and seeing like 3. I remember, I'm assuming they still do this, but I would buy the gallon plastic jugs of Evan Williams, and about 2 or 3 of those a week, probably. I mean, and I think I made the comment that, like, I was telling you that story of like how much I was, and you were like, man, like, it's not really the way it works. Like, I remember saying like, oh, I'm a big dude, I had a big, my tolerance was high, and like, man, I don't know. There's something about alcohol and what it does to your brain that it's not as cut and dry as you think it is. And you told me that story, and, especially, and I know we're going to get to that point in your story I know at the time you were drinking a lot. Like, your tolerance should have been, if following conventional thinking, your tolerance should have been way higher, way too high for that to happen.
Right.
But I remember there were times I only had a couple blackouts in my life. But both the blackouts I had did not come too far after beginning my night. And so, yeah, there's something about that. I don't understand the physiology of it and why it happens.
It's confounding, and at times it was very frustrating, because there were nights that I couldn't get drunk. I would drink anything and everything I could get my hands on, go to a party, go to the bar, run through all my money. And there were nights I couldn't get. It's like I was on acid while trying to drink, but I wasn't, because I've done that and I know what that's like. But
so I was going to ask. I was like, that was a very specific set of circumstances you just laid out.
But then there was these nights, like I said, I'd have a beer, a pint, and a shot, and then lose time travel till tomorrow.
Right.
And at the time, the really frustrating thing was like, because I loved drinking. How come I couldn't figure out what the secret formula was to have those nights just that never ended?
Well, it's almost like we weren't intended to put copious amounts of poison in our bodies and, have it down to a science, right?
Yeah, and for me that was it, because I chased that rabbit for a long, long time, trying to find just that right spot to just ride the wave. And I can't tell you, countless times I felt like I was there, and I joke because I'm not a surfer at all. So it's funny that I always use this analogy, but I get up on the board and the next thing I know, I'm drowning in a tsunami.
Yep.
Because a lot of it has to do with the fact that, I came up with this phrase years ago that I don't know which one I have. I don't know if I'm a gluttonous, lustful son of a bitch, or if it's lustful gluttony.
Right.
And I don't know that it really matters which way it goes. The point is that I don't know how to say no. I don't know how to do anything slowly.
Right.
Especially when it comes to drinking and drugging.
Yeah. So for me, part of the reason why, I eventually moved on from drinking to stuff, to Kratom. And when I could buy that at a head shop, I eventually found it in like capsule form. And it was a pain in the butt. But for me, part of the reason why I liked it is that I knew exactly the amount that worked. The thing I always hated about alcohol is like trying to find, like, it's like trying to ride a bull. Like it just, no matter how skillful you think you are, you're going to make it 8 seconds.
And then if you're lucky.
Yeah. And then you're on your ass. Like, it's just the way it is. And so that is just like, it's just a wild animal that does not want to be tamed. And it is amazing how long we beat our head against that wall trying to tame it, as if we can manage it. And listen, you can do it for a while. It's eventually going to get you for sure. And I know we're going to get there, but so let's jump back real quick. So you graduate high school. I know your drinking got pretty intense there at the.
Yeah, so I was a typical kid where graduating high school, went immediately to college the following fall, and away to school. I went to Central Michigan University. And this goes back to the friendships and not having depths in my friendships. I have a graduating class of about 300 kids. There was like 6 or 8 of us that went to Central Michigan University. There were probably 3 times as many kids that went to Western for some reason. Which, if you're familiar with the MAC, that's, the rival to Central Michigan. There was a lot of kids that went to State. A couple of the kids that deserved to go to Michigan went to Michigan.
I mean, do we need to hold it in that high regard?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mitch is a proud Wolverine fan.
Wearing my Michigan sweatshirt as we
For the record, I'm not a Buckeye fan. I'm a UC fan. Go Cats! But I disdain, as an adopted IU fan, I am obligated to dislike both the Buckeyes and the Wolverines.
So to my point though is that haunted by that new kid experience when I first arrived to Michigan, I understood the tremendous opportunity and the value of the clean slate of going off to school and doing so where literally nobody knew me, because there wasn't anybody following me or going with me to Mount Pleasant. And so, and that's the origin of Mitch. So my birth name is Michael. But being a football player and in the age, that I went to, everybody knew me as Spies. It's to the extent that my brother hated that, because again, we're Irish twins. He's only 10 and a half months younger than I am. And he, in his own right, varsity lettered in other sports, basketball, tennis. And I varsity lettered in football. People who knew us together, like in our youth group at church, they're Spies and Dave. For some reason, he didn't get.
You got the namesake, and he didn't.
He didn't get elevated.
I feel like there's a Bible story with this kind of thing.
But not playing football I'm like, it's going to be weird introducing myself to, people at school as
Spies.
I'm Spies.
Right.
And Michael was too formal. And as it turns out, there were 7 mics on my dorm floor, in the freshman towers, which happened to be actually a co-ed floor. So there was 12 rooms, 6 of which were guys and 6 were girls. And one room only had 2 guys in it because it was the RA and his roommate. That was the privilege, was that there wasn't 4 people crammed in that suite for the RA. So if you can imagine 7 guys and there wasn't a mic in that room. So there's 7 mics crammed in 5 rooms on the 7th floor of Troutman Hall at CMU. So one of the early weekends, most of us were huddled around a keg at an off-campus party and gave ourselves nicknames. And one guy his name was Mike Williams, he became Willie. Another kid, Mickey, he was already a Mike of Mike's. That was his family name, so he was already known as Mickey in his family. So we left him alone. I don't know who gave me Mitch. I don't know how I got Mitch. But I became Mitch in the fall of 1992.
See, this is a podcast exclusive because I had no idea that your real name wasn't Mitch. I had no idea.
Yeah, so it's my wife. When my wife gets serious with me, she calls me Mitchell.
You're like, I'm in court.
No, she doesn't call me Michael. She calls me Mitchell.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you said Michael at first.
No. My mother and yes, the court of law are the only people that refer to me as Michael. My official email at work is michael.spies at the company name. But if internally, if you're sending me an email, you just type in Mitch Spies and it automatically
pulls it up for you.
Pulls it up for the other associate. But yeah. So
that's the origin story of Mitch.
But it's part of that almost ironic insidiousness of my existence in these years, and that I started off my college career as a character.
Right.
There wasn't any reason for me to be Mitch outside of what I just explained to you. And according to my mother, that wasn't a very good reason, because as the first weekend I came home with this new moniker, she's like, if I wanted to call you Mitch, I'd have named you Mitch 18 years ago.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. So, all right. So at this point, and a fun fact about Mitch, at some point you picked up rugby. You didn't play rugby in high school. I'm assuming that wasn't a high school thing.
No, I discovered rugby in college. I didn't play while I was in college. I actually played rugby after graduating college for a men's team. But I learned and discovered rugby at Central Michigan.
It's like a rec thing.
It's a club sport, not a varsity sport.
Right.
Yeah. So it's not intramural. It's a step above because they actually play against other clubs from other schools. Like Ferris is one of the great programs in the state of Michigan, and CMU has a rival.
Yeah, my cousin played lacrosse at UC, and that was same deal. It was a club sport. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they played Ohio State. They played I remember he played a bunch of like Big Ten schools.
Yep.
At tournaments and stuff like that. So it's not rec, it's not intramural, it's a club sport, but it's not like an official, like I guess you would say, varsity sport.
Right. So they don't have dibs on any of the facilities or any of the equipment.
Right.
The guys who are serious about it, though, that they'll go as a team to the student rec and just take over,
right?
A section. And when 20 dudes stormtroop in, it's like we're working out.
Yeah, a bunch of rugby players walk in. We're like, we're taking this over, unless the football team's there,
which never happened because the football guys had their own space and had their own stuff to do.
Right. So you're going throughout your college. Did you stay at CMU? Did you graduate from CMU?
Yeah, in 4 years. I started in fall of 92 and graduated spring of 96.
So you get to start fresh, and you're starting out as Mitch. Did you, at any point in that kind of starting fresh beginning, your freshman year, did you ever think like about maybe curbing the alcohol
Absolutely
stuff,
not.
or was that you just went full bore and embraced
Not even
it?
an option. Not even an option.
I mean, that's a tough age to do that.
Yeah, and I was hell bent on doing things my way,
Mm-hmm.
and my way was in a very distinct fashion, not playing football for the first time in 8 years. Now I have a fall that I'm free.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not at practices. I'm not at workouts. I'm not obligated to have my evenings and my weekends consumed.
Right.
And this is half my life I devoted to football and to baseball and to the sports that I played. And I was going to college strictly as a student. Um, I had some opportunities to play football at D2 and some smaller D1 schools, but I just like, I'm done.
Yeah, dude.
For that reason, because it was just I had lost the love of it, and my junior year of my high school team, we made it to the state playoffs for the first time ever in my school history. And I was like, that's as close as I need to be to like the uber successful.
Mm.
And I can hang my hat on that. I was part of that,
It's good,
regional title. Right. And my senior year, I missed most of that year because I was injured. I had a knee injury to start the season, and then a shoulder injury to finish the season. And I'm done.
Yeah.
So I was hell bent on I'm having fun, and I've said this before. My undergraduate years were not an academic experience. It was a social existence purely.
Right.
Which was funny because, it was full tension and conflict because I was on the Dick Spies scholarship. Dick Spies is my dad, and he sent my brother and I to school with the agreement that he would pay for room and board, he would pay for tuition, book money, beer money was on us, spending money was on us, but we had 4 years to graduate. And if I took a single class or a semester or a year beyond 4 years, I was on the hook for that.
Yep.
Right. And so I had to make some grades, and I had so that I could graduate on time. So there was a lot of juggling.
Mm.
And I'll be very frank, I don't remember my senior year at all. I don't. Because my senior year, I was 20 years old, and I turned 21 finals week.
So you were a youngin' then for your class?
Or no. I turned 21 at the end of my junior year.
Okay.
So I was 22. I was able to drink. I was in a successful band on campus that we were playing. We got together like right at the end of the summer because I stayed on campus between my junior and senior years. We got together right at the end of the summer, and we started playing gigs probably by like October because the four of us were serious about it.
Right.
I played it, and it was an original material, like heavy metal band. People described us as a mix between like Pantera and White Zombie.
That's tough to get started that quick on original stuff. I'm assuming if you're a cover band in a college town, you could probably find work anywhere.
Well, so Mount Pleasant happened to be a hub of some local music talent.
Okay.
And there was another couple of bands that were also similar in the genre, so that if the bar wanted to have a heavy rock night, they could fill the bill real quick because there's 3 bands that they could call up and we'd be all playing together. And we were all buddies.
Right.
We knew each other. We went to each other's shows and stuff like that. And this is the time of rock is having its last hurrahs these years, right? This is the mid 90s. And the frat guys loved us. The sororities hated us.
I can't imagine why.
The frats loved us. And so there was a stretch I want to say like 10 weeks we played every single Friday and Saturday night at one point.
That's tough. So
and we get paid in beer and weed.
Right. So nothing to help you get ready for the next week is what you're telling me.
No, so I honestly do not. I remember enough of my senior year academically that I know I had a tutor. I had a guy who took pity on me. That I had met, because once you declare your major and you start having some of the classes with the same people because You know, it
You
starts
guys are in this-
narrowing
right,
with
right.
options and what the class offerings are. This one guy that I had met early my sophomore year, he and I had a lot of classes together, and he took, I swear, he took pity on me. For whatever reason, his existence was he was going to get him graduated, and he's going to get me graduated. And he dragged me to classes, and he would show up in I lived on campus my whole 4 years too, so I lived in the dorms all 4 years. He would show up in my room, banging on the door. You didn't go to class, so we got to get together and we got to go over notes. The worst thing about it is I don't remember the guy's name. I owe him huge.
Yeah, right. I was going to say, man, it sounds like God might have sent you like, all right, I got plans for this later. Go salvage this, dude.
I have lots of people like that.
Me too. Yeah.
Throughout the years.
For sure. So, okay. So you do graduate. So did you graduate? You graduated in 4 years.
I did.
You didn't have to go past your Dick Spies scholarship fund. So I imagine, I didn't go to college, but I imagine was there like this falling off precipice moment of like, what the hell do I do now?
Yes. So interesting situation. So while I was at school, my parents left Michigan, moved to Cleveland for a few years, and then came back to Michigan right before I graduated. And so for 4 years, I literally didn't have a home because the house that I grew up in was no longer the place that I went home to air quotes, right, for holidays. And over the 4 years of me being, at school, I can count on both hands and have a finger or two left over how many times I visited home. I didn't have any interest in going home. I wanted to be out, and I wanted to be on my own, and I wanted to be the guy calling my own shots. And so the prospects of graduation are I'm moving back home. Right.
That's again, not a pleasant thought, I'm assuming.
To some degree, I had a carrot dangled out in front of me. My dad, again, in his infinite wisdom, he's like, where else are you going to go and live for a year rent-free and be able to save some money to finally get a place of your own that's not in the ghetto? There's no argument against that. Right. No matter how independent I want to be, I can't afford to be independent because I spent every single dime I could get my hands on to buy beer, buy drugs, and entertain myself for the last 4 years. I didn't have a life skill aside from being able to cook and do my own laundry. Beyond that, I didn't know what I was going to do for a job. I was just going to class because that's what I was supposed to do.
What was your degree? Or what is your degree?
I have a finance degree. My undergrad is a finance degree with a concentration in banking.
Okay. So there wasn't any idea of like.
So I did have at one point, through the job fairs on campus and whatever, I kind of fell in love with Comerica Bank.
Okay.
Which is like the Detroit version of Fifth Third.
Okay.
And every time they were on campus, I'd go see them. It'd be the one time I would like clean up, put on my best front, right, and go be rusty schoolboy.
It's hard to imagine
because they were prominent, and they weren't an automotive manufacturer that was going to require an engineering degree.
Right.
Which is what I didn't go to school to study for because it was too fucking hard. It required some commitment and diligence. Finance and banking, not to knock the people who do really, really well in that, but it wasn't hardcore math. And because I have this amazing personality, I could sweet talk my way through enough of it that, I didn't have the technical capabilities. So I would go put on my best foot whenever they were on campus for a job fair and go schmooze up with them. And they kept on telling me, it's like, look, man, your grades aren't good enough. We don't want you. We don't want you. And it was fair. I don't know how I graduated. I graduated high school with a 3.8 and I graduated high school with a 2.7.
You college? You mean you graduate college?
Or,
2.7?
yeah, college.
Gotcha.
I graduated college with a 2.7.
And this might be a dumb question because, again, I never went to college, and so I got a trade certification at one point. And so do they, like, when you go, do they ask for your transcripts when you like apply for jobs? So like
some jobs they do, yeah.
So it's not just I have this degree and that's good enough. I mean, I'm sure some places that might be
because
fine.
I mean, if you think about it from an employer standpoint, they don't want to just hire anybody who says that they've got a degree.
Right.
You're not going to hire the worst kid in the class.
Right.
You want the best kid in the class. That's why every job posting now that has even a whiff of finance or accounting, they're preferred at the bottom of the job listing, preferred CPA or MBA, even for an entry level position, because they want the best of the best.
Right.
And then pay them cheaply.
Yeah, that seems like a fair trade. So you moved back in with your parents.
I lived at home. I say home. It was a place I'd never been to before. It was actually a very nice townhouse in Novi, in the neighboring town from where I grew up, for a year with my parents.
Okay.
And the reason it was a year was the girl that I was dating at the time was a year behind me in school. She was a year younger. And that was the heartbreak. Everybody I knew up at Central Michigan somehow, some way was younger than I am. And it's kind of bled into a lot of my life today, because it seems like every person that I'm friends with, my wife included, my wife's 8 years younger than I am.
Robbing the cradle.
There's parts of our lives that I don't even think about. It's weird. It gets weird.
Yeah, we won't do that here either. Let's move on.
So I mean, the simple math is that, the time of my life that we're talking about right now, me graduating college, my wife is just starting high school. That's the age gap.
Yep.
But so the girl that I was dating at the time was only a year younger than me. And I was waiting my time for her to graduate, and she was much smarter, much more ambitious. And I was like, these are the coattails I want to ride. And I was biding my time to figure out where she was going to land a job at graduation, where she was going to end up living, and wherever she went, I was going to follow her.
Okay.
Whether she wanted me to or not.
So is that what happened?
Yes. And so she, thankfully she ended up with a local job, in the Detroit area, and we got an apartment together, and we lived together for a few years. And, as most alcoholic relationships, it absolutely fell apart a few years down the road. And
I thought you were going to live happily ever after.
Sure. So did I.
Okay. So you said you guys moved to Detroit at this point. Okay. So I feel like we're getting to the point. I know what happens later. So kind of, I'm assuming the drinking continues.
Oh yeah. And that year that I was at home by myself, I got my first DUI. That was a big milestone. A lot of those weekends, I got an accounts payable job through a staffing service, that, almost every Friday night I would leave and head back up to Mount Pleasant to spend the weekend. Not only because my girlfriend was there, but like my band is there. All my buddies are still on campus or around campus. There were a couple times where, like, I was so hammered on a Sunday night that, like, there's no chance I'm getting back to Detroit to go to my job on Monday morning. There are times I called and like, oh, I got a flat tire and I can't get a service until Monday morning, or, as creative as excuses you can imagine, I used it.
We think we're clever.
Oh, geez.
Yep.
We think we're so smart.
Yeah. Man, Mitch, you get a lot of flat tires.
Or how many grandmas do you have that have died?
You're like, oh man, have I used this one before? Yeah, I know that feeling. So you said, so that's a year in and of itself, getting a DUI, going through that whole.
One of the rare weekends, I stay in Detroit. I get invited to go out with some coworkers, and I make a U-turn where I shouldn't, and the whole front of my Chevy S10 pickup truck is littered with beer bottles and stuff like that. Many not from that night, but more than a few from that night, and I get picked up in Royal Oak, which is kind of like a Hyde Park area of North Detroit, and my poor parents. So they're supposed to leave that Saturday morning to come actually here to Ohio to visit one of my uncles. And, they get the call at 3:00 in the morning, because that's what time cops call people.
Right.
Or maybe I called and I don't remember. Suffice to say, I'm glad that I'm not drinking and I'm not drugging today, because if I got arrested and had to call somebody, thankfully I do have my wife's phone number memorized, but I don't know yours. I don't know Kyle's. I don't know anybody's numbers memorized anymore, because it's just a matter, you pick up the phone, you hit the picture, and now you're dialing.
Right.
So yeah, my parents got called in the middle of the night and bailed me out. And took me home. And long story short, I end up with a 90-day suspended license and a year's probation and slap on the wrist.
Right.
Thankfully, the arrest was a non-event. I did a U-turn, and the cops saw me do the U-turn. It wasn't like I was, not that I'm making an excuse. Given enough time, I would have been on the freeway. And I'm glad that, hindsight being what it is, I'm grateful I got stopped where I got stopped. I drove maybe 3 blocks from where I got in my truck. And I certainly should not have been driving. I was in no shape. My BAC was over 0.2.
Dang.
The three DUIs I have of my official record has always been over 0.2, which is, pure evidence that I don't drink socially. Don't know how to. When I drink, I drink.
Right. So get your DUI, finish that. You kind of spend that year at home. Then you say you move in with your girlfriend. Drinking continues.
Oh, yeah.
When you guys broke up, because that was kind of it seemed like that was basically your plan. Was when she graduates, I'm going to go with her. So that's over now. So was that like a?
It was a phase split. We lived together for a couple years. Then she got another job in Ann Arbor and was tired of driving every day to Ann Arbor.
Sure. How far of a drive is that? I know they're kind of close on a map, but
so from where we were living at the time, it was probably a good 35, 40-minute one-way trip for her. I was doing the same in the opposite direction, because the job that I had, was now in Royal Oak. We were living in Wixom. The job I had was with a mortgage company, and initially I was working corporately in Farmington, which was maybe a 15-minute drive, and it was nice.
Right.
But I moved into a sales support role, and I got assigned to a sales office, and it was further out, and so we agreed that we were going to stay together as a couple, but for the business decision was she was going to move to Ann Arbor and I was going to move to Royal Oak, so that our commute times were a lot easier, because that was the day-to-day travel we were doing. And being young kids and having no money, and we're doing nothing but just buying gas.
Right. That commute means something.
And having the fact that we'd already done a year of her, finishing school, and me being in Detroit, we knew that we thought we could handle the distance. There was another summer, like the second summer that we were together, we weren't living together. We weren't close. We figured out how to make the distance. So we had a couple of chapters under our belt. We're like, we'll just make this happen, make this work too, until, whenever something gets fortuitous.
Right.
Well, I never got fortuitous. My drinking and my partying continued to be my priority, and she's ready to get real. And the last conversation I had with her was over the phone, late one night, and her parting shot was, Mitch, someday I want to have a family, and I don't want to have that family with you. And I've never had a heavier hatchet hit me in the skull.
That's what I was going to ask you, man. So, I mean,
I've had some mean shit. I've had some mean shit said to me, deservedly.
Right.
But like that one, nothing's ever cut like that one had. It was truthful. It was truthful. Today, I know for a fact that girl was protecting herself.
Right.
1,000%.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you're at a point now, obviously, especially with time, but also in your recovery, where you got to look back on that and be like, that was the best decision she could have made at the time.
Without question. But at the time, that was me pulling the ripcord for a very long tailspin.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Was that a moment for you where it really? Because I think so. I mean, I just interviewed Dustin, and then just talking with other people in recovery, it seems like there's always this same kind of pattern I see, and myself included, where you kind of like you get stuck in the momentum of that downhill descent, right, into the rock bottom, right? At first, it's very gradual. It gets steeper, and then there's always seems like there's a event that most people have where it's like you just fall off the cliff, and then you're in a death spin.
At the time, I probably wasn't as premeditated as I believe I was now.
Right.
But that was the first real time in my life where I was like, fuck it.
You're just leaning into it.
Well, and again, I don't know that I had a conscious thought of like, well, screw you, you're going to hurt me. Watch this. I'll show you what hurting me is all about.
Because our addiction eventually gets a mind of its own. We don't need to make any decisions for it.
Right. But yeah, that was the first legitimate, like, at this point now, I got nothing to hang on to.
Right.
At this point now, with her walking out of my life, I'm renting a room from a lady in a house. I don't even legitimately have my own place, right? I've got a car and a job. That's the vastness of my responsibilities now.
And really what that is you've got a little bit of money in your pocket to buy booze, and you've got a place to go drink it. You got a way to get there.
And I don't have anybody I got to answer to, except for I got to show up to my job and I got to perform, or at least appear to perform.
Stay under the radar.
Right. And I can do that very well because if there's any kind of vocational training I got out of 4 years of college, it was that.
Or teaching the important life skills.
That's right.
CMU,
survival,
and every other college everywhere, pretty much.
Yes. This is called survival.
Right. So, at this point, you mentioned that this was kind of your tailspin. This is your death spiral. Is this the point that things are just a terminal velocity trajectory straight to rock bottom?
No. So yeah,
it gets worse. He says.
There's turbulence. So I'm trying to figure out where, like, what year this is. I can't. So this is what drugs and alcohol do to you. Right. I don't know if this conversation that I had with this girl was before or after 2000. And the reason why 2000 is important is because I went to South Florida for the Y2K New Year's and partied with Fish for
the world's going to end. I'm going to be in Florida.
Well, better yet, I'm going to be in the middle of the Okeechobee Swamp, Big Cypress Swamp with Fish for 3 days for New Year's Eve. And if the whole world's going to hell, I'm going to be at least wrapped in hippie love.
I bet you felt like, man, this is the plan. I'm a genius.
Yes, and the fact that I actually had the money to do it was like, that was the stamp of validation. I've made it. I actually had a plan. It came through, and I'm not. I returned. You know, I didn't get arrested while I was down there. I came home
You
with.
say that with so much surprise, like
I was honestly, and I think really what it came down to is unless the National Guard was going to be there. I mean, there were 75,000 people at that event.
Holy cow!
It was huge. It was huge.
That's a Bengals game.
Yes.
That's insane.
Yes.
Well, I mean, the cops are like, we're not chasing you hippies into the swamp.
No.
Whatever happens to you, happens
Right.
to you.
That's right. There's gators in there.
Oh man.
You take your own chances.
Okay, so you get back.
Yeah. So
okay.
so the point is, like, I can't remember if I went without her to that, or maybe we were supposed to go together and she broke up with me before that. I don't know.
I'm assuming you don't remember much of it.
I know I had a good time.
Right.
And at one point, the last set, Fish played for 7 hours. They came on right before midnight. They had a porta-john on stage. So in case somebody had to move away from their kit or their gear or whatever, they could take care of what they need to take care of and then come back. They played 7 straight hours, man. It was
insane.
an experience. I think there was like 7 sets over the 3 days that they played.
Holy cow, man.
Because they played 2 sets the first 2 nights, and then they played 3 sets up to the marathon then. And it was crazy. It was wild. It was wild. So the tailspin is that I come back and I just don't give a shit about anything. I'm like, I don't care. I don't care. I had mentioned Comerica. I finally, through having some work experience, I get a job with Comerica finally. And it's a good job. It was a rotation program within their investment bank that I could work some of the backroom operations and work through a series of different departments to gain a whole bunch of experience to fast track me into management. It was exactly what I had wanted from my CMU days, and I got in. Somehow I got in. Somehow my work experience to that point in mortgages was like, yeah, you have what we need. We'll forget about the grades. You've proven yourself. Until I proved to them that they were wrong because I wasn't who they were looking for. At the time I was living with a guy who bailed on me, and I was like, I don't want to move back into another situation where I got to rely on somebody. I liked the place that I had rented. I had a house in North Detroit. So I got a part-time job working at a music venue that was very similar to like the Madison Theater in Covington.
Okay. Yep.
I was working security as a bouncer. And I knew better. That was not a good place for me to be. If I was interested in having what I was wanting to have in my life, like what the job was representing me on the right path, finally, working at the Magic Bag was the last place and the worst place I could be, because I had worked in the bars, on and off through my college days, and I knew what went on there. It was late nights, and it was the wrong crowds, and it was anything and everything that I wanted within, on arm's length. And we were going through a system upgrade or something, and a couple of us were voluntold that we were going to be part of the testing on a Saturday or a Sunday morning. And it was like regular business hours, Saturday, Sunday morning. And we had a big, huge show that night. And I got home at like 4:00 in the morning, and I was supposed to be downtown Detroit in the office like at 7:30 or 8 to, just go through some simple stuff and then be gone probably. And at 2-3 hours later, it wasn't like a full day, but I was a no-show. And my attitude and my personality, I had some friction and some conflicts with some people, in the 2 years that I was with the bank. And the lady who had originally hired me, she was doing some rotations of her own, and she and I kind of looped back together. And I remember that Monday morning coming in, knowing that we were going to have the talk because I was a no-show over the weekend. And she hit me with a question I wasn't prepared for. She's like, if you were me, what would you do? And I remember saying in a voice, I didn't recognize the voice coming out of my mouth, but it was me talking. And what that guy was saying was like, I'd fire me. And I'm like, wait a second. What did you just say?
Right. I would like to rescind my.
I don't even know who was talking right
That's
there.
a point where you slip and you're like, I'm still drunk from the. I mean,
but I remember uttering those words because just like that girl, Comerica had to protect itself.
Yeah. It's amazing. Isn't it amazing just how honest, like, there's certain things. I feel like even in the short amount of time that I've been sober, mainly because of having you as a sponsor and a lot of the seasoned ladies and gentlemen that I'm exposed to at Celebrate Recovery, I feel like there are a lot of things about sobriety and addiction that I understand now that I definitely didn't when I was in the middle of it. There are still aspects of addiction and being in that life that I don't know if anybody really understands, because there's a certain level of you've gone beyond rationality, right? But that is not always just a bad thing. Like, there are times when you have these moments of clarity and these moments of honesty where you're like, where the heck, like, I don't know if you're anything like me, there's probably a lot of lying and a lot of manipulation that went into your using days. And every once in a while I would have these just honest moments, and they always came at a point that it hurt me, right? Like, out of all the times for me to lie and protect myself, there were times every once in a while where I would just be honest, and then I'd have the same kind of thought about it that you did. Where you're like, why the hell did I do that?
Yeah. So going back to my childhood, there was a mantra that my father raised me on. I've heard this phrase uttered countless times, and it was his judgment. In essence, it was the manifestation of his disappointment. And the phrase was, I thought you were smarter than that.
Mm.
And so I went through anything that I was doing. I wanted to make sure that you knew, or at least I was convincing you that I knew what I was doing, that I was in control. Because if I didn't, then that phrase came true.
Mm.
And those were those moments where there wasn't anywhere else I could go mentally, emotionally, to try and muster a fight or an argument, because the gig was up, and that's the way it was with Alicia. That's the way it was sitting here with the Comerica manager now. In both of those situations, it's like, there's nothing else that I can do. And I've run out of chances. That the curtain's been pulled, and there's the old guy with the levers and the fog machine. And the unfortunate fact is that there's many more instances in my life before real rock bottom is realized. That in my mind, in those few short years, there's nothing that relates those two experiences together. Aside from like, hey, Mitch was in both of them. Because again, going back to that compartmentalization mentality, it's like work had nothing to do with how I was handling relationships with, a loved one, the girl of my dreams. They exist in completely different worlds. And so, but again, the retrospective recovery and inventory processes, what I've been able to identify is that these instances are actually very similar.
Right.
And the boiling point is that at some point I've come to grips with, I can't fake this anymore. I have to show my hand, and my hand is nothing but a 5-suited mess of 2 7s and jacks.
Right. So I'm assuming she let you go.
Yeah.
Out of that conversation.
Yep.
And again, like, man, like I hearing your story and I had the same reaction when I heard Dustin's story. It was like, I remember what it felt like to be in that downward trajectory, and then the hits start and they don't stop coming kind of thing. And it's just like one more blow to your self-esteem that you already are in a deficit with anyways.
Yep.
And nobody's fault really, but your own at this point. And you know, speaking in the royal we kind of in general terms, and we all get to that point. So what happens next? What's the next step after that?
So both of those episodes are followed by a good healthy binge. And then, you know, and some, you know, primordial grogginess, you know, you're like, oh, I gotta fucking do something.
Right.
You know, when with Alicia, it was a matter of like, I don't need anybody, and I can do, you know, I can do things by myself. I can exist alone. Because the truth of the matter is that with the exception of her, a singular person, the whole rest of my life has always been arm's length relationships. Nobody knows me too well. I don't know them too well. It doesn't get messy. And whenever something, you know, veers left or veers right, it's just easy to navigate. And because I'm a congenial guy, I quickly make friends, you know. But, you know, the one and only, like, that relationship was me all in, chips cashed in, and it's like, forget that. That hurt too much. We'll never go there again. So that was the write-off. And then, you know, professionally, it's like, well, I got to do something to pay rent. You know, I'm not, you know, I don't do good hangry. And so homeless isn't an option. So, you know, you tuck your tail between your legs and, you know, eat some humble pie. And I, you know, here I am, a college degree guy. And, the guy who lives upstairs from me is a lifelong shop rat. And I just like, Art, I need a job. He's like, oh, you can come down to the shop, we'll hire you.
You say shop rat.
It's so Detroit, again, automotive, right? So like, you know, we're talking, this is the tier 5 supplier. They make the little tiny widget things that go into the bigger widget things that then ultimately end up in cars.
Right.
And, so, you know, I got to get it together enough to, you know, pass a piss test. And now I'm working someplace for like $12 an hour. And that's enough to pay for the car and pay for the rent. And, you know, Art and I rubbing nickels together to figure out how we're going to get, you know, a 12 pack every night, you know, and a bag of weed once a week. And we do that for a while. We do that for a while. And I lean more on the bar in that scene. And now I'm a regular, you know, fixture because I'm working almost every night that they're open, which in one way helps stabilize some things, but in other ways it completely unravels things because it's that lifestyle that I don't need at all. And it leads to, you know, some side gigs and some side hustles with, you know, some local musicians to be security or to you know, to be a roadie or whatever, you know, and the longer I go, the more and more, the further and further I'm getting away from anything that looks like a career. Now, regardless of the fact that I didn't get serious about school, I thought I was going to have a career out of all this, right? And I was disenfranchised because of the lack of tolerance that corporate America had with a guy like me. You know, apparently they didn't understand what they had.
Listen, you're trying to have a white collar career with a blue collar habit, or so the world thinks.
All right.
In my experience, it doesn't matter what collar you wear.
Right. So for a short while, I was thrilled to be immersed in the blue collar, you know, because the expectations are a lot lower, you know, in regards to the performance, in regards to the personality, you know. I could cuss like a sailor to everybody, management, foremans, you know. It wasn't the office.
Right.
It was a completely different culture. And there was a part of me that I'm like, Dad, these are my people.
I feel that. Like, yeah, I relate to that a lot. But
so for a time being, I just sit pat, and I stew. And DUI number 2 happens. And it's really a non-event. No, I take that back. So I experienced firsthand that being a shop rat on tier 5 automotive supplier puts you at risk of layoffs.
Yeah, because you're at the end of the chain,
right? And everything is driven off of contracts. And the small shops don't get lucrative long-term contracts.
Right.
And so this sweet job in which that I don't have to worry about what kind of physical shape I'm in to do. And I've positioned myself now as the number 3 guy on the bowling team. I'm living large. I get cut because I was like one of the last 10 or 15 guys hired, and they're like, the last 25 guys are gone. And I'm like, shit, now what? So I just put together a resume and start sending some stuff out. And I end up getting an interview with the mortgage company, another mortgage company, and it looks lucrative and it sounds like it's a solid job. And I've already had an interview or 2, and I have another interview scheduled. And I go out and celebrate a job I don't have yet with some friends, and I get my second DUI. And so this is I'm going to try and make a long story short. So I end up no-showing the interview because I'm in jail. And I call the recruiter as soon as I get bonded out on personal reconnaissance. I said, whatever you can do, save me this interview. Get me rescheduled. Whatever you ask, I'll do. I'll pay you. I owe you, but get it. And somehow she does. And the guy who ultimately hires me, has this approach, this mindset of like, well, could have happened to anybody. On paper you look good. We like the skills, and then we like the experience that you have. We want to give you a shot. And so they hire me after no showing because I got picked up for a DUI the night before the interview. And
do they know you missed because of a DUI?
Yeah.
Wow.
When I got face to face with them, and then I came clean, but I wasn't going to tell anybody anything until I actually had a confirmation that I was going to have the interview.
Right.
But yeah, I came clean at the interview, and I was like, I apologize for not being here last week, yada yada yada. And what I learned and I find out is that this mortgage house is just like working for a realtor, only it's not a realtor, it's a mortgage house. So these guys party as hard as they work, and it's nonstop. And so for 3 years, I am busting my ass professionally, but also partying my ass off with all the people I work with. Like, we would have beer in the office. Like Thursday nights and Friday nights, it was like, all right, we got to stay here an extra 2 hours and process all this stuff and get it out so we can make numbers for this month. I'm ordering pizza and I got beer coming in. You guys just stay here, hunker down. That was the way we did it. And
so again, you're at a place.
I'm like, these are my people.
You keep finding new people, man.
Yeah. I mean, and it's birds of a feather.
Right.
Like, everybody in that place is a mess. Absolute mess.
So the DUI kind of like, that makes sense now.
Yeah. I think in some ways, I don't know that anybody else had been arrested, but like it was always like that. It literally could have happened to anybody.
Right. So when he said that, he meant it.
Right. You know, what they took measures to make sure like nobody left the work function. Right. They're like, we'll get you a cab because this is the days before Uber and Lyft. But
Right.
yeah, it's Detroit. You can get a cab. You know, might cost a fortune. Or there's a hotel. We share a parking lot with a a Sheraton. the company will spring for a room for you because it's easy. It's cheaper to pay for a $60 room than it is for a $400 bailout.
Right. Right.
But the end of the 3 years is, I get my third DUI, and that's the biggie. Because in Michigan, if you have 3 in 10 years, it's an automatic felony. And when I got picked up for my third DUI, I was an hour outside of Detroit. And I was in county jail because I got picked up by a deputy. I wasn't in just a city jail or a little tiny village jail, like the first 2 times. The first 2 times I got Ferndale and Royal Oak were little tiny places that were right next to each other, kind of like Hyde Park and Reading, right?
Sure.
And each one has their own little tiny jail. It's got three cells and whatever. So those were the first two DUIs. The third was a biggie. It was getting picked up by a sheriff's deputy. So when I got arrested, I went to county and got in the tanks. And nobody knew it. Like I was just a no-show for work on Monday. I got picked up late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, and was still in jail. I was in for 2 weeks before anybody found me, and somebody finally got a hold of my parents and let my mom know where I was, and she got an attorney, and I got bonded out.
So were you not able to reach out to anybody, or?
So no. Now we're in the age of cell phones, and nobody remembers anybody's numbers.
Right.
Everything's pre-programmed, right? This is in 2004. So it wasn't a smartphone. It was a flip phone, but it was still nonetheless, you had contacts programmed. My parents at this point had moved here. My parents moved here in 2003, and I was at a Halloween party in BFE, mid Michigan, and got pulled. I was parked in a parking lot, but it was in the middle of the night, and the car was running, and I was the only guy in it. Made the deputy's job real easy.
Right.
How'd you get here, son? I have no idea.
I believe it. You're coming with me.
That's right. At least my car's warm. So yeah. So longer story short, that's. I started that job with a DUI, and now this job is in jeopardy for another DUI, and it's a biggie. And they didn't know what they were going to do with me from an employer standpoint.
Right.
And because they didn't know when I was going to get out, they didn't know what I was going to be charged with, they didn't know what the future ramifications are going to be. With the felony charge, that was a 1 to 5 years sentence, which scared the absolute shit out of me.
I imagine, yeah.
Because at this point, this is the first. Now things have gotten really, really, really real about my life being completely upside down.
So you get parents bond you out.
Yep. So I get bonded out. So and important to say, this was my last drink and drug. That I joked earlier that my last drink was a 30-pack of Miller High Life, and it was. That's what I went to that party with, and I drank most of that 30-pack, along with some Jello shots, and there was ample dubage there, and some pills and powders to boot. So it was a 4-banger, like we used to call.
The original 4 Loko.
So yeah, so my last that's my sobriety date. Halloween, October 31st, 2004, which I don't know if it's ironic, so I'll call it a coincidence. My birthday is April 30th,
Mm-hmm.
1974. So on a calendar, my birthday and my sobriety date are 180 days apart. So, and I think of a calendar in a circle.
Sure.
So they're right across from each other on that circle, on that wheel. They are midpoints of one another to the actual 1 year process, or the anniversary of each.
Right. So now,
So when you think of like a yin and a yang,
right. I'm assuming that the legal processes probably take some time, right?
well, so that's what you pay a lawyer for,
Right.
because
Right.
I mean the judge, the original presiding judge with my arraignment was like, "How do you plead?" I'm like, "I don't think that's where we're at,
Right. Right.
because I don't think I've done anything." I immediately saw some technicalities in the circumstances of my arrest, and my attorney did as well. And so my arrest date was the 30, well, technically November 1st. And 2 weeks later I got bonded out. My actual sentencing then didn't happen for another year.
Okay.
So I actually went to sentencing with a 1 year token in my pocket.
So I was going to ask, so had you been exposed at all to?
Yeah, that's a good and necessary rewind. So the probation of the second DUI is
Okay.
where I got introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous.
Was that like a court ordered
I
part
got
of it?
well, yeah, court ordered, and my probation was like drug court.
Okay.
So I had to be at the court. Well, so for the first 90 days of my probation, I had to go to the police station and give a breathalyzer.
I'm sure that was fun.
It sucked. I lost my license for a year. And once a week I had to be at court. I either met with my probation officer or I met with the judge. And meeting with the judge was like everybody in the program met with the judge. And those were not fun meetings, because most of the meetings were him going through people and their violations of probation. And I was the subject of that more than a couple of times. One of the things that, to illustrate the fact that I am a thick-headed son of a bitch, especially when it came to my drinking, and me wrestling with this idea of me being an alcoholic. My original sentence for my second DUI had no community service. I had violated my probation enough times to rack up 30 days of community service. And in just the first 90 days of my probation, maybe it's 4 months. Anyways, and I remember the Honorable Joseph Longo, district court judge. He was not a good looking man. And sitting on the bench in his robes even made it more daunting, right? More ominous.
Right.
But I remember him and I having a very quick conversation in his courtroom, where he was violating me for what he was threatening to be the last time. He's like, "You seem to have not gotten the idea that you can't drink, and yet you continue to do so." He goes, "You have put me in a position where the next time you violate the terms of your probation, in regards to you failing to be able to provide a clean breathalyzer," and they didn't want you under the legal limit. They wanted triple zeros.
Sure. Yeah.
Abstinence. Right. And there's times I went there and I'm like, I don't know how I got triple zeros, because I played games the entire time.
Trying to tame that wild beast.
Trying to figure out how much I could drink, of what I could drink, when I needed to quit by, so that I could wake up the next morning on my way to work, stop. Because mean, I had to be there between like no later than 10 o'clock in the morning. Like you couldn't roll in there at 2:30 in the afternoon. It's like, all right, I'm here to do my breathalyzer.
Right.
And so so the judge was like, do you think you now have a problem? Are you convinced? And I remember my head physically starting to nod. I distinctly remember my chin going up and down. But I also, at the same moment, this is the duality of existence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a part of it's, again, it's evidence of my makeup. Here's the facade. Whatever you want to see, I'm going to let you see. So I'm shaking my head, yes. But in my mind, I am raging and I am screaming, no, my problem isn't my drinking. My problem is you. My problem is this court. My problem is the state of Michigan. My problem is the fact that I have to have a job and work every fucking day. And the list just goes on and on and on and on.
Right.
My problem is my bad luck. And that's an important point too, because I was convinced for a long time it was just
bad luck.
I had karma has had a number on me.
Because I'm sure you were looking at other dudes who had never been picked up, and you're like, that guy drinks. That dude drinks as much as me, or that chick. I know that chick could have given.
People who their character weren't they weren't up to snuff. They were bad dudes. They were bad people.
Right.
They the ones that deserved this kind of bad luck, this kind of karma, this kind of the universe against them.
Mm.
And I was like, what the fuck did I do? Who did I do what to deserve this? I was convinced of that. I was a victim.
Mm.
So I white knuckled through 90 days to finally show up and do all of the blows that I needed to at the cop shop and satisfy that. I had to pick up trash. I don't even know how many Saturdays in a row to get 30 weeks, because it was, 8 hours was a day.
Right.
And I racked up 30 days of community service. So half a year, more than half a year. Also, part of my probation was 3 Alcoholics Anonymous meetings a week. And I remember going into my first one and being absolutely mortified.
I don't belong here. This isn't for me.
Like my skin crawled, like just walking into it. Part of it was just the situation, right? This meeting is held in the gymnasium of an old Catholic school in North Detroit. Detroit meetings are set up at tables. It's not just one meeting. There's, the one meeting starts, right? And then it breaks up into these smaller meetings at each table.
Okay.
So like, here at CR, if you could imagine like all of the subset groups having their own table in the meeting room here at the village and then going at it at the same time.
Right.
Right.
It's chaos.
Yeah, it is. And then to boot, we're in a Catholic school's gymnasium and we're all smoking. Mind you, this is 2004, 2005. Or no. No, at the time this was 2003. This is before my last DUI. So yeah, so I'm like, there is no way I'm coming back. But I have to.
Right.
Now, thankfully, Detroit is similar to Cincinnati in that there are a ton of meetings all over the place. All every hour of the day. And
yeah, we got our fair share of Catholics too. I mean,
well, but they're not all at Catholic spots, but they are all in churches. They almost all are in churches. And that's another chapter of my past that is a good chunk of my testimony too.
That was a joke from somebody that celebrates CR who comes from a Catholic background. And that was his joke, is like, where there's Catholics, there's going to be AA meetings.
For sure. But yeah, I'm mortified, and I'm convinced that I'm not, I'm not as bad as them. Even in the circumstances I am with the court, I'm like, I got a job, I got a car, I got a place. I'm not a deadbeat. I'm struggling, but I'm not, I'm not running from anybody.
Right.
Um, and so, I white knuckle through 90 days of being clean, legitimately being clean. But as soon as I'm done with that, I'm like, all right, it's on because nobody's watching me now. Right. And I try to do it earnestly with a couple of rules in place that I put on myself. Like definitely no driving and drinking and driving. That would be idiotic. But like some smaller, like I, let's try not to do some shit in the week. All right, let's just be cool, and we'll just keep it on the weekends, right? And if we can try not to black out, that'd be nice too.
Right.
And I make all three of those are out the window within like the first month. Like the first month, I don't know what the circumstances was, but it's like a Tuesday night and I'm out, and one time I go someplace, I have 2 beers, and then I'm driving home on a suspended license. And then like the end of that first month, I'm with some buddies and we're out and we're going at it. And like, I don't know how I got home. Like, so those didn't last very long at all.
Those half measures, man.
Right. And then a few months later, I'm at this Halloween party with this girl that I'm dating and I'm living with. It's her childhood friends from when she lived in the Flint area. So that's where we're up in mid-Michigan, and we're going at it. And it's, like I said, it was a 4-banger. And next thing I know, it's 3:00 in the morning, and I'm sitting in a parking lot in a town I don't know, by myself in the car, with her screaming at me on my cell phone, and a sheriff's deputy behind me with his lights on, approaching, the car, and I'm like, I don't know how the fuck I got here, and shit's about to go down.
Right.
and the crazy thing is that there's not any panic in that moment. The crazy thing about it is there's actually relief, because in some ways I've been here before, because it's like I can't go anywhere, I can't run anymore. I'm done.
The relief. There's
right. I don't have the burden of what I've been doing now for years laying on me. Now the outlook isn't bright. I know what's about to happen.
The outlook wasn't bright before your DUI either.
It wasn't, but at least now I have some certainty. And that's
Right.
the crazy thing too about that. One of the things I've realized now over these years is the fear of the unknown can cripple me.
For sure. 100%.
And the certainty of knowing, okay, this cop's going to arrest me and I'm going to go to jail and I might not get out anytime soon, was comforting. How crazy is that?
Well, I was sharing with Dustin in Dustin Vance, who was the first episode, and we kind of hit on that, right? Like where you're stuck in that. I described it as gravity, right? You might be in a death spiral, and it may suck, and you may not like where you're at, and maybe you didn't realize. Like I'm not going to speak for you unless you want to agree with it, but I'm sure there's part of you that's like, this sucks. Like there was probably times where you woke up hungover from the night before. You're like, this is terrible. This is not going to end well. And but as bad as it sucks, it's still keeping you. It's still certain to a degree. And so the thought of not using is like launching yourself into space. You're like, what am I just going to float out there in the abyss? I have no idea what's out there.
Well, so for the big thing for me is I didn't know anybody sober.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a model. I didn't know what it looked like to be an abstainer outside of, nerdy Poindexter. Right. And that sure as fuck wasn't me.
Right.
Right. So like, I didn't know how that was going to work out.
Right.
And I didn't like the stereotype that it portrayed. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
And again, you know, drugs and alcohol worked really, really well for the insecurities and the emptiness that I had for a long time. Very efficient in supposedly fixing me, right?
Right.
But I had all these justifications like I'm not a hard drug user. I'm a recreational and I can be fine not doing drugs. But our society is what it is, and it was really tough imagining not being a drinker.
Right.
Even though I had never, ever been able to successfully social drink, I could at least drink someplace in a social setting and then leave and then finish my,
Right.
you know, finish the night off, wherever else I wanted to, that I didn't have to worry about portraying this, nastiness and this messiness to people that I wanted to kind of still impress. Right.
Right. Right.
But the most important thing was at that point in my life, I didn't know anybody who was sober. I didn't know anybody who voluntarily abstained from substance abuse or substance use. So I didn't know what that looked like. I had no model whatsoever to examine and say, okay, is this even possible?
Hmm.
So again, it was the fear of the unknown. It's like, nope.
I mean, I did have examples, and I was still scared to death to quit. So, okay, sorry. Let's get because I really want to get to the point where you go through the court. I'm assuming was the recovery meetings at this point? Is this another part of the legal process for you, or because you said your sentencing date wasn't for another year,
Right.
So was this something that like your lawyer was like, hey, it'd probably look good if you started going to AA meetings, or was this you're like, I'm done, I need help?
That's definitely a part of it. The attorney's the attorney's job is to say, look, we need to do everything we can to produce a good presentation for when it comes to sentencing, so that
Right.
they don't throw the book at you. Because even if they go light, a year is a year.
Right. That's still a year of your life. That's a long time.
And I'll be honest with you, my original probation officer from the district court, as soon as he got wind, of my arrest, he's like, dude, you got to do something. He was never a guy I didn't. I like the guy. He wasn't a stereotypical probation officer. He wasn't a ball buster. I found out a couple years later he was in recovery too.
Changes things.
It does. And I realized that he was on my side. He wanted to help. He truly, genuinely wanted to help.
Another one of those people that you look back on and
Yep.
You're like, I don't know how God put you here.
Oh, there's no other way to explain it.
Yeah.
And to an extent too, Judge Longo.
For sure.
The first judge.
I was thinking that when you were describing like when you're going through like what you were thinking mentally when he asked you like, do you see you have a problem? And like all of these things that you were like, I know that you know now, but I was going to ask you, like, looking back now, you got to look at that and be like, what I didn't realize is that all of these things I thought were against me were the things that were saving me.
Right. Yeah. Because unfortunately, I wasn't in a spot.
Right.
I wasn't in the proper condition to be able to accept the fact that, yes, these were people of authority, but they weren't trying to control me.
Right.
And that's part of the mommy wound I've got. Anybody who steps in and wants to start making some decisions on my behalf is trying to control me.
Right.
And that wasn't the case. And I definitely know that now. So that all of those people are in my corner. But the other thing that was surprising to me was, and for all the falsification of those signature sheets that I had signed, that, oh yeah, he's at meetings, maybe half of them I was actually at. And some of that AA stuff stuck. And when I got finally out on bond wearing an alcohol tether from county jail, it was probably a couple days. I'm like, I got to get to a meeting. I don't want to be there, but they're the only people I've ever met who know what's going on and understand. I don't have to translate stuff to them, and they're not going to judge me because they didn't when I was there the first time. Yeah, you run into a crusty old timer who's a little salty about people being court ordered to his meeting. But where the fuck else are we going to go?
Right.
And so to me, that's part of the soft spot. Like I heard somebody in a CR meeting a couple weeks ago talk about he doesn't like going to AA because the court orders people to AA. There's more than one way to seeing that. And properly motivated, the courts are trying to do any just the same as you or I are trying to do with newcomers and with sponsees, in that we're just trying to help.
Right.
We're trying to be a resource. And so that, I joke, that I got exposed to AA from, a nudge from the judge.
That's a good way to put it.
By being court ordered. And no, it didn't take initially. I was so resistant, and I was so thick-headed, and I was so stubborn. But when the final hammer finally fell, I knew where I needed to go. I knew where I needed to go, and I the very first meeting that I went to, I saw a guy I recognized, and I approached him after the meeting, and it was a surreal experience. My recollection is I had to take about 30 steps from the back door of this church to this fella who was standing with a couple other guys smoking cigarettes next to the dumpster. I don't remember my feet touching the ground. I floated there. This is God doing for me what I can't do for myself. And again, another experience in which that a voice that I did not recognize as my own coming out in about as pure honesty I could muster. And I may have just blurted this out. These guys could have been engaged in a conversation, and I just like, but I was just like, Mike, I need help. I don't know what to do. And he's like, well, here's my number. He goes, my home group's on Monday night. If you want to go to a meeting tomorrow or Sunday, call me. And at the very least, I'll definitely pick you up and take you to my home group on Monday night. And that's what it started. That's what started my AA journey.
He ended up being your sponsor?
He was a temporary sponsor for me. Really, it was just a ride, and he was a recovery buddy for the first year. Unfortunately, I don't know if he's sober or not. When I moved from Detroit here to Cincinnati, so this is the end of 2004. This is a November, Thanksgiving time, 2004. I moved here in June, July of 2008, and he helped me move down here. But he was not in a good spot when he helped me move. And I've lost touch with him, and he was another one of us that when he was out ripping and running, he was ripping and running. He was a heavy drinker. He was a crackhead. That was part of his story. So unfortunately, the odds aren't in his favor. That if he was out, he's out, and it wasn't going to be pretty. But he saved me. He saved me in a lot of ways that first year because he was my transportation to a lot of regular meetings.
Dude, God bless those people in recovery meetings. I know there are a lot of people like that, and I'm just, if you that's the role that you play in part or in whole in recovery, and you're listening to this, just know that there's a lot of people whose recovery stories, you're a big part of them.
Yep.
And so you don't have to be a sponsor or a speaker or a worship leader at a CR or any of those things. The greeters, the people that are like, hey, I'll pick you up for a meeting, man. Like, you have no idea how much those things mean.
Right.
So-
I mean, that's the crux of the responsibility creed for Alcoholics Anonymous, is that, for anyone, anywhere who needs a hand of help, I want the hand of AA to be there. And that's the role that we take. My first home group, I had 2 home groups in Detroit. One was Monday night. It was a men's meeting. It was small. It was intimate. I loved it. It was like, sitting with my favorite uncles. These guys had, at the time, like 20 years each or more. And that's where I met my first sponsor. And I also had another home group, which was Friday nights. And it was a bigger group. And that was the meeting that I ran into Mike at. But the thing that I always hold special with that meeting is, like, we would make up service positions just to get a new person committed to, like, oh, I got to be there every Friday night.
Right.
I got a job to do. We had, I'm not joking or exaggerating, there was 15 service positions at that meeting. It was a big enough meeting, so there was 2 coffee makers. We would have 2 men and 2 women as greeters. So there's 4 people, there's 6 people right there, right? We would have a new chairperson every 3 months. We had a secretary, we had a president, because it was a group, not just a meeting as well. So yeah, we had 15 service positions, like, we would make up a service position if we needed to, just to give somebody a job and have that sense of value and purpose.
Yeah. I mean, listen, as much as most of us in our addiction run from responsibility, all of us are built to have a requirement for some responsibility in our lives.
But and routine too.
Right.
I mean, that's part of the suggestion of 90 and 90.
Right.
90 meetings in 90 days is you get ingrained into a routine. I've heard so many people who have years under their belt and they hit a tough patch, because that's just what life does sometimes. And my buddy Dennis has probably coined it the best. He goes, I just have smart feet. My feet know where I need to go, because it's Tuesday night and this is where I'm supposed to be on Tuesday nights.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's, Thursday morning. This is where I'm supposed to be on Thursday morning.
Mm-hmm.
Whether I want to be there or not, my feet know, just, they take me there anyways.
Right. So you attend. So
yeah. So the initial probation introduces me to AA. Some things stick. I know where I need to go. And Mike and I go to that Monday night meeting. It's a 12 and 12 meeting. So in essence, my first year, I go through the 12 steps about 4 times. And I meet my first sponsor, Dick B, who's no longer with us. He was one of the COVID casualties a few years ago. He had some complicating health issues that got exacerbated. So God rest his soul. But he was a gruff, no nonsense, military guy. That he could shoot the shit, but he took no shit. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And he was perfect for me. He was about the same age as my dad. They served in Vietnam about the same time. Although they didn't know each other or anywhere near each other, physically, or logistically, but, he laid the groundwork for my step work. He laid the groundwork for the spiritual journey that ultimately ends up being what recovery is. The big book says specifically that its main purpose is to put you in contact with and to build a relationship with your higher power. I said that I had some church as part of my background and my childhood. I grew up in the church. My brother and I went to youth groups, and we were Sunday attenders, but it wasn't a spiritual thing; it was a social thing.
Right.
And so those college years and those early adult years, at best, I had an agnostic slant to any kind of spirituality, any kind of relationship with God. And, of course, I'm textbook, the bristling as they say in the big book, with any notion or mention of God. And really, it goes back to, again, the fear of the unknown. The fear of the unknown is a theme and a ribbon that's woven through everything for me. And if it's something I can't wrap my head around, then it either doesn't exist or I need to be afraid of it.
Right, right.
That's the caveman Neanderthal in me. And Dick laid it out very simply in his ever so eloquent way. He's like, Mitch, there's only two things you need to know about God. He ain't you, and he exists. Everything else is on the table. I had a buddy who came into recovery about the same time I did. His name also Dennis, not the Dennis that talked about smart feet. But this is when Harry Potter first came out, so his higher power is Harry Potter because they had the same initials. And it worked for him. It worked for him for a minute, until he started figuring out some things and got real. And that's what it comes down to me for anyone who's listening. And the invitation is just, that willingness to be willing, and have an open mind and know that we all come in with bias and prejudice. I know some very pious people in recovery who had their world turned upside down on spiritual terms because they did not come in initially having a firm grasp of what a personal relationship was like. That, at the time, the God of their understanding was still a God to take orders from and check boxes and follow a whole bunch of rules, and nothing about the grace of God, nothing about the love of God, nothing about the fact that God knows me and loves me and wants good things for me. Yes, there's some terms that go along with it, but it's not staunch rules. It's not staunch expectations like I thought it was. It's not a matter of me being good enough. And
that's the thing that I struggled with in my church background, and hearing you talk about it, and again, kind of to go back to Dustin's just because it's so fresh, kind of did the same thing. The thing about Christianity that I feel like people miss a lot is the thing with Jesus is, yes, like you said, there are changes that he asks of us. There are ways to live our life that he asks of us. And there are rules in the sense that he has set what is good and what is not. And as a follower, once you accept Jesus, he's like, these are the things. This is how you live your life. This is how you model your life. It's part of the reason why Jesus was here, to model that for us.
Right.
But the thing that people miss is that the change doesn't happen until the relationship starts.
Right.
Because it can't. Because if we could just do it, then what would we need Jesus for?
Right. And that was the thing, is like, I was like so many other people that I was under this notion that, to be a Christ follower was to be one of those non-dancing fools from Footloose.
You got to put baby in the corner if you're going to be at this church, boy.
And that's not what it is. It's crazy that there's still churches today to claim to be Christian and women aren't allowed to wear pants in the building. That's not what it's about. That's not what it's about. So for me, being able to have a clean slate, to clear the board of what those prejudice and those bias that I had were, and to start fresh. It was a process. The good news is that, yes, when I finally got sentenced to my felony, I had a year under my belt, and I had the opportunity to at least go through the 12 steps numerous times through the context of the 12 and 12, but I hadn't worked the 12 steps yet by the time I got sentenced. I dragged my feet a great deal on the 4-step. And I was actually a year and a half, almost a year and a half sober when I finally did my 4-step with Dick. And I don't recommend that for anybody. Because ultimately what it comes down to, and if I could real quick, I'm gonna say very quickly what I understand the 12 steps in its entirety to be. Your first 3 steps are basically, look, I'm jacked up. I can't fix myself. There's not another human being who can fix me. I need a higher power to provide the means for me to be made whole. That's the first 3 steps. Step 4 and step 5 is to go through an inventory process so that I can identify with some specific intentionality what my issues are. Even if I have all the willingness in the world to be fixed, if I don't know what to fix, all I'm doing is chasing my tail.
Yep.
So the inventory process 4 and 5 is figuring out what that is with the aid of a sponsor, saying, okay, I know I'm jacked up, but how?
Right.
And where? Because some things need to change. And if I don't know what to change, then, I'm lost.
Yeah. History is bound to repeat itself. Yeah.
6 and 7 is you going to God, with this relationship that we have with a higher power, saying, okay, this is what I think I need your help with. And I'm willing to accept that help. 8 and 9 is us identifying what we need to take accountability for and find some willingness to go be held accountable for. My opinion is we make the list, but we sit on it for some time. 10, 11, and 12 is our daily maintenance, in that now I need to start living differently and putting into place some of those changes so that when I eventually do go make those amends from the 8th and the 9th step list, that I can demonstrate that I am no longer the person who caused those harms and caused those hurts. So it's not just me showing up and apologizing for it. I can make real amends in the fact that amends means change.
I think just to interrupt you, I think it's important both ways. It's important for both parties involved in the amends process, because there's a chance that when you go to make your amends, and I know that from the step studies I've been a part of at CR, which we follow many of the steps for those of you not familiar with AA or either AA or CR, they're very similar, and they basically follow the same.
Right.
It's the same thought process. So as you're hearing Mitch kind of break down in kind of segments of the 12 steps and kind of what his idea of the purpose of them is, and the driving factor of those, which I agree with, by the way. So with those similarities, like there are 2 things I see people get hung up on, and it's the 4th step. A lot of people, like in step studies, it's kind of like this thing where, like, the 4th steps hit, that's when shit gets really real. Because when you really got to take a look under the hood, it's hard. It's tough. Nobody wants to do that. And so if you're not ready, you're not going to do it. So that's a tough part. And the amends process definitely has a pattern of causing some people anxiety, because they're like, I don't know, I don't want to face this person that I've done wrong, or I don't want to have to face this person that's done me wrong. And the reason being is that there's a chance for rejection there, right? Like, there's a chance that I could go try to apologize. I could go try to make my amends to somebody, and they could just be like, I don't believe it. I don't believe that change is happening in you, or whatever. Or, on the flip side, they don't take accountability for the things they've done that you lay out in front of them. But I think your advice is good advice, that you sit on your amends list for a while, because you need to see that change happen in you too, so that if that rejection comes, guess what? Like, the change is happening. The evidence is there.
Right.
And so whether or not they choose to believe it, it's unfortunate if they don't. But the fact remains that there is change happening in your life. You are not the same person. You are not living the same life as when you started your amends. You started your 12-step process.
Right.
And so having that evidence is kind of the thing you cling to in the face of rejection, of it's not going to shake you. It's not going to deter you that, like, hey, the change can still happen even if this amends is not made, does not go the way that you feel it is.
Right. And we've heard it,
or hope it is. Sorry.
we've heard it said many times in the context of the conversation around amends, is that, you know, I'm not making the amends for the other person.
Mm-hmm.
You know, ultimately what I'm trying to do is shake loose of the excess unnecessary baggage of my past, because the last thing I need is to be shackled and anchored into my past.
Right.
That's not to say that, there are good times and there are good things about my life before,
I'm sure.
but at the same time though, if I don't recognize and I don't give the chance for the blossoming of the change that I'm embarking on to take root, it's really hard to go to somebody and say, that's not who I am anymore.
Right. Right.
And I think that's it's just it's seldom that it's explained with that kind of clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that I'm some guru or I'm some, some shaman of some sort within recovery. It's just I've the years of experience that I've had, and I've lived this program myself, and literal thousands of people that I have met in the last almost 20 years of recovery to watch and vicariously experience through them as well. This is my best effort of understanding, and in an elevator pitch format, say, here's what the 12 steps represent.
Right.
And here's how they make sense to be a foundation and formula to change life. Because that's what it's ultimately for. I mean, step 12 starts with having as the result of these steps, having had a spiritual experience. That spiritual experience is talked about in 2.5 pages in the big book itself. And all it says is in 9 different ways: change, transformation, change. So as the result of the 12 steps, having had a spiritual experience, we then carry the message to those who also still struggle. And part of that process is in that amends, chances are those people are hurting in their own ways too.
For sure.
Man, that's one of the things I didn't bargain for in recovery, is to have my eyes open to the fact that, and CR does a great job at it. Alcoholics Anonymous has a laser focus on alcoholism and alcohol abuse. CR is more inclusive with the hurts, hangups, and habits. But even in the annals of AA, that literature still speaks of the fact that they've done their diligence too, and they've had experts and religious leaders all talk about the fact that there's not a single person who couldn't benefit from the spirit of what the 12 steps represent.
Oh, for sure. 100%. I mean, we even, it was something that you and I think, have talked about, and it's something that kind of came up in a Bible study that we had at the church I attend, where I kind of expressed, like, this is not, an original thought in the broad scheme of recovery, the broad, history of recovery, but it's an original thought that I had within myself of, I'm kind of going through the process, and along with my recovery also came a kind of a resurrection in my spiritual life, in the same way that you kind of found your faith in a very, in at least a deep and meaningful sense, as you started recovery. My faith was resurrected kind of with my recovery. In fact, I got sober really before I kind of came back into, that's a story in of itself, but before I really started to engage in my faith again, where I'm looking at this and I'm like, man, the 12-step process looks an awful lot like the discipleship process that's as it's laid out in Scripture. it's really no different. In fact, anybody that, let me put it this way, there are people that I met in church that I saw I could tell that there was something about them that was different. And there was changes in them that I know was probably, even if I couldn't like intellectually come up with the reason why, I'm like, man, you live your life in a way that doesn't seem practical and attainable as a human being, right? Like, not just in the sense that they don't do bad things, but also in the sense that they have like a peace about them, right? They have a joy about them that doesn't seem to shake with their circumstance. And I look, now that I'm in recovery, and now that I've seen what that change looks like in recovery,
Right.
in the sense that people are changed in a way that is beyond what they were capable of, right? And it tends to be in a very visceral, obvious way in recovery. But like, I think of people, and I'm like, okay, they got to now that I'm looking at it, I'm like, I think they got into the same place because of their discipleship process with Jesus Christ. I think whether they realize it or not, there's a definite parallel going on in their life where God and they're in that relationship with Christ is working on those character defects, bringing things up that they need to make amends for, bringing things up that they need to change, that they were not probably would not be capable of changing themselves.
Yeah, and you know what? They both have the same cornerstone.
Mm-hmm.
Is they both come to a point where they realize that self-reliance is insufficient.
Yep.
The dependence on a higher power, whether you call him God or not, is the absolute primary principle.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, there's no surprise at all that they look so similar. To me, it's no surprise at all that Johnny Baker's like, hey, if we take these 12 steps and make 8 principles out of them, they line really close to the Beatitudes from
right.
from the book of Matthew.
Yep.
And all. So it's to me. So for me, you had mentioned earlier, so in my journey through recovery, how do I get, how did I end up starting in AA and end up with CR? So, AA gave me the foothold and the foundation for a spiritual life. Anybody who I can't help but chuckle. Anybody who says that, AA in alone on its own in a vacuum is not a spiritual program. I don't know what AA meetings they're going to or what AA program they're working, but again, the literature says very, very specifically that, God's in it, and it is definitely a relationship, i.e. spiritual.
Right.
So that's the groundwork. And again, a lot of credit to Dick and his very, very stripped down, but also very inclusive invitation of just be willing and be open-minded.
Mm-hmm.
Recognize that God exists and I ain't him, and everything else is going to fall where it falls, depending on what kind of seeking I'm capable of doing. And one of the ways he illustrated that to me is like he's like, man, life is so often just a matter of, you go to a pool, you stick your toe in. If it's not comfortable, you don't get in it, but you commit to coming back tomorrow and testing the water again. And when it is finally comfortable, you get in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what it was. So yeah, my inventory process got delayed because of my stubbornness and my resistance and my fear. But I eventually figured out what it is that I needed to work on. And I went to God in the, 6th and 7th step to say, I need your help. And he's helped me. And over the years, I have been on that journey, and I'll say this too, like I'm 100,000% subscribed to the fact that life is dynamic and God intended it to be dynamic, and so it's never going to stay the same. So I've had multiple sponsors over the years because I've gone through different things in life. Dick was a lifelong bachelor, so when I met my wife and we were pregnant, or my wife was pregnant, and we were about to have my first son, I'm like, Dick, I don't know that you know how to relate to that because you've never been married and you don't have kids. And I don't know what kind of guidance you're going to be able to really give me. You're probably a really good uncle to your nieces and your nephews, but you're not a dad.
Right.
And you're not a husband. And he agreed. So I got another sponsor.
Hey guys, Matt here. Please excuse this little break in the action. We had some minor technical difficulties, but I managed to catch it and restart the recording. So we're going to pick up right where we left off right about now. So sorry about that. Our recording got cut off, but you were saying that you talked to Dick, said that you were entering a new phase of your life, you're becoming a father, getting married, and said, "Hey, I don't think this I don't think you can relate," and he agreed, and so you got a new sponsor, and then if you remember where you're at from there.
Yeah, so I've had a number of sponsors throughout recovery, and I've got the benefit of a collective of perspectives of the 12 steps program, a spiritual life, and recovery in general. And through that, when I moved here from Detroit to Cincinnati, I got a new sponsor here local that was attending a church and asked me, do you and your wife go to church? And I said, no. And he asked me why. He said, if you have a reliance on God and you believe in God and you're following guidance from God through the context and the lens of the program, why aren't you going to church? And I said, I don't go to church because of the church.
Man, this is just like I had a dead-on conversation that you just described with somebody that was in my step study when I got sober, when I wasn't going to church. But yeah, sorry, it was just it made me laugh. Yeah.
But and that took some time. So the guy's name was Tim, and Tim had to work on me. Because I said, I don't have a problem with God, I got a problem with people. Because people seem to be the reason things get jammed up.
Right.
When it comes to spiritual principles, he goes, but do you feel like that happens here in Alcoholics Anonymous? I said, no, which is why I keep coming back, because we have the 12 traditions, in AA, that help provide some parameters and some guidelines as to how we conduct ourselves when we have differences of opinions that don't seem to exist out in the world.
Right.
When they should. And he's like, well, would you be willing to come and check it out? And I said, sure. And so at his invitation, we started attending a church in Mason. And I was wowed. And it wasn't because of the people, it was because of me. I was okay to just let certain things go,
mm-hmm.
and not be offended and not take some things personal.
Right.
Not saying that I was accosted by any stretch of the imagination, but I just, we were talking about through the amends process, recognizing change in ourselves. And that was one of the changes that I saw in me, and that I didn't go in looking for a fight.
Yeah. Right.
And I was like,
man,
wow.
This is all hitting too close to home for me too.
And part of that slate wiping, resetting that I had with God, I also had with the church. And a lot of it had to do with, again, recognizing that every single person I have met in church is broken and flawed, just like I am. Or maybe more importantly, is not like me, but in different ways. And that's why we are a church.
Right.
So church became a regular part of our lives, seemingly out of nowhere. I think with my wife having kids, and she grew up in the church like I did, and was, a regular, active youth member, like myself. So when we became parents, it was like, I don't know. That was one thing definitely that we took from both of our parents' model, that we're like, this is important to us, and it's something that we want to do for our kids too.
Right.
But we had some of the same reservations about the dogmatic approach. We're not going to do anything without knowing why we do what we do, in regards to the relationship with the church and relationship to, the church body. And it took us a while. So we were at one church for a few years, and then it went through a change of leadership, and my wife wasn't comfortable, and then we physically moved from Mason to the Little Miami area, and we changed churches at that time, and that church didn't really survive the pandemic because it was a small country church. And it was through that church that I met my buddy Jeff, who came to me. I gave a kind of a quasi testimony at the time that I reaffirmed my baptism, so that I could baptize my oldest son.
Hmm.
And he came to me with a confession of his own substance abuse addiction, and working with him and with the pastor there at the time, that's where we got that invitation to check out Celebrate Recovery at Rivers Crossing.
Hmm.
And so he and I started attending those meetings and did a step study together, which is where I met Paul, our mutual friend.
Good old Paul's I'm Wednesday recording, doing a remote interview with
awesome.
him.
You know what? He was, I mentally, I'm like, I wanted to make that suggestion, but I didn't know if you had the means or the wherewithal to do that. So I'm glad.
Yeah. He's on. He'll, if you guys think this podcast went long, I remember his first testimony.
Right. So Paul Salazar was my my CR sponsor. He was one of the leads for my step study that I did with Jeff. And we finished that just as the pandemic hit. My family now attends Rivers Crossing because of, the CR having that family component with celebration place for the kids. My wife, when things started opening back up and we were contemplating going to be in person someplace, my wife looked at me and she's like, you and the kids are already familiar and already plugged in at, RC3. We might as well just go there as a family.
Right.
And I'm glad that she felt that way, because my kids love it there. My high schooler is part of the high school ministries and tribes. I've had many wonderful things said about him from his leaders. My little girl is a regular Friday night attender with me at CR there. Matter of fact, more people look forward to seeing her than they do me.
That's not surprising.
She's a ray of sunshine.
That's right.
No doubt about it. I don't know how she's related to me, to be quite honest.
Yeah. So going back to Paul was actually, so the timing is not a coincidence for sure, because Paul Salazar, who's, like I said, is going to be on one of these episodes, he due to a change in job for his wife, they moved to Oklahoma City, and I remember we met back in the spring of the pandemic, so like right when it was still pretty fresh, and so this would have been 2020, and man, I was getting near the end of my rope when I was ready to finally, later that summer I would end up joining a step study, still not sober, by the way, but he actually mentioned to me before he left, he's like, hey, when you are ready, I got a guy that I think would be a good sponsor for you. And he mentioned you. And so it's not surprising. I didn't know that he was your CR sponsor.
Yeah, no, in his parting shot when he left for Oklahoma, he told me, he goes, watch out, do me a favor and keep an eye out for Matt and Kyle.
It's crazy.
So we both got set up.
Right. Paul the matchmaker. Well, man, I know there's even more detail that we could go in to your recovery story, but we are well into hour 2. So I want to make sure I give you the opportunity before you, first of all, thank you for joining me with this. And secondly, is there any parting word that you would like to end?
One of the most important things about my journey thus far, especially in the context of Celebrate Recovery, has been that there seemed to be a time where my faith journey and my recovery journey were in sync but parallel. And the thing that has drawn me to CR, and the reason why I'm engaged the way that I am today, is that there's this intertwining of my recovery and my faith now through this program and through this community and fellowship, that not not to take anything away from, my experiences in AA. I still consider myself a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I still have many people that I'm connected to and still engaged with. I don't attend as many meetings, and a lot of that has to do with lifestyle. Having 4 kids and a whole bunch of sports and extracurriculars, evenings are a commodity, and a premium at that.
Right.
But to be able to go to my church and see my people on a Friday night, and then Sunday morning see the exact same people in almost the exact same places,
Mm-hmm.
and have, sometimes even similar language on being spoken on Sunday morning from the stage in the message that I've heard in discussions and teachings and dialogue within recovery, is, to me, nothing short of amazing, and certainly no coincidence. Um, Honestly, my only wish is that there were more opportunities for CR groups to meet, because unfortunately I've run into too many newcomers in CR who are white knuckling through a week because there's only so many meetings of CR, and they're discounting the other 12-step programs that are available through other fellowships. And I see a great partnership, that if in fact you are trying your best to hang on to your ass with both hands and struggling to do that, you know, there's nothing that stands in anyone's way of being able to go to an NA meeting, an AA meeting, an OA meeting, and do that in conjunction and in parallel with CR.
100%.
They do not compete against each other.
Exactly. Yeah, I want to echo that too. In fact, a lot of the intentionality behind the way I set up the podcast of not being tied to any one recovery program is that I see the value in specifically in my own personal life having I've actually, I don't know if I've ever actually been to an AA meeting, but the late Charlie Hartman was one of my sponsors, and we actually I didn't start my sponsorship with him, even though it was through CR. Our sponsorship, what he was working with me on, was actually the Big Book. And the Big Book is awesome, man. Especially that back half with the stories, is that stuff stuck with me even when my sobriety didn't. I thought about those stories, and so absolutely, I completely agree with you that if you're struggling and there's not a CR meeting that's reasonably close, I guarantee you, especially if you're listening to this and you live in the Southwest Ohio area, I can promise you there's an AA meeting somewhere. There's an NA meeting. For sure.
There is no greater concentration of AA meetings in the world than there is in the 275 loop of Cincinnati.
Yeah.
There are almost 800 weekly meetings.
That is insane.
In the tri-state,
in the best way possible.
In the tri-state area. I mean, to a large extent, I mean, AA was birthed just right up the road in Akron. So it's close. It's close to the actual bona fide roots of the fellowship that started almost 90 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, even if you don't live in the Cincinnati area, I promise you there's an AA meeting going on somewhere.
Absolutely.
Unless you live in, like, I don't know, the middle of Alaska, maybe. But I'm assuming you could probably find an AA meeting somewhere around there too.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had the distinct pleasure of attending AA meetings in multiple places in this country. My 2-year token I got with Dick in Austin, Texas.
Right.
So, you do the math, right? I mean, AA has been around almost 90 years. Celebrate Recovery was created in the mid 80s.
Right.
So it's AA just got a head start.
Yeah. So listen, if you're listening to this and you're wondering if AA is right for you or CR is right for you, here's the thing. AA wouldn't be around in the prominence that it's around if it didn't work for somebody.
Absolutely.
So keep in mind, and I'll be sharing my testimony here, my story here, and on the podcast eventually. And I thought I was special in the sense that,
Right.
these recovery
nobody as
programs
ugly
work
as
for
you.
some. Thank you, thanks for that. Says the man in the Michigan shirt. Shut up. Anyways, I was like, the recovery might work for somebody, but I don't think it works for me. They don't know me, and trust me, nobody's that special. So that in mind, there is hope. You don't have to keep living the way you've been living if you don't want to. And if you're in recovery, I hope you take Mitch's story and you pull the things from it, the hope that is throughout, and God's sovereignty over Mitch's life, and bringing him through 18 years of sobriety, and how he's and speaking for myself, how he's impacted other people. He's absolutely an integral part of my recovery, and I'm thankful that God placed us together in the relationship, not just as a sponsor and sponsee, but as friends. So, thank you for doing this, and for those of you listening, stick around, listen to the other ones. I'm going to have a couple more released, and I intend to keep doing these as long as somebody will listen and somebody will share.
I appreciate you inviting me on. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. See ya.